Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. We're down to the last few days of COP27. How's everyone doing? Good? Sorry about that. Well, I'm kind of exhausted. My feet are very tired, so that's how it is with me. But I would like to thank all of you for being here and joining us for our event on low emissions, food systems, and conflict-affected settings. My name is Maria Elisa Villarino. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, also a research fellow at the Alliance of Biodiversity and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, as well as the leader of the engagement work package of Mitigate Plus, which is a global research initiative in low-emission food systems. And for today, I'm just going to give you an overview of how this session will go. And that is after my introduction. I will turn over the floor to Dr. Augusto Castro Nunez, who is the leader of the Low-Emission Food Systems Research Area at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, as well as the Scaling Work Package of Mitigate Plus. And he will talk about the evidence and trends on the links between food systems and peace building. I will then present a concept on the nature-based solutions that could deliver multiple sustainable development outcomes like climate mitigation and peace building and more. And after that, we will have a moderated panel together with biodiversity and REDD Plus experts from the German and Colombian environment ministries. And we will have a chance for the audience to ask questions to our panelists. And then we will close the session with remarks from Dr. Augusto Castro Nunez. With that, I'll leave the floor now to Augusto for his presentation. Augusto?
Wondering if I can use this one instead of that one. So, thank you for coming. And as Elisa mentioned, today I will present on some evidence on the trends on the links between food systems and conflicts. There are some emerging narrative about these relationships. Some come from the adaptation point of view. Those narrative builds on the fact or on the assumption that climate variability is affecting food security, is affecting water security, and therefore is affecting conflict. So that's one of the main narratives evolving in these times. Another narrative comes from the mitigation perspective. So this narrative says climate action, not climate variability, but climate action, meaning, for instance, REDD+, can affect the distribution and the access of the natural resources to communities and therefore affect social conflicts. As part of this narrative were created the safeguards on REDD+, for instance, back in Cancun, 2010, I think. So that's a super strong narrative as well. Other narratives are around the forest conservation perspective, more in the natural security, conflicts, environmental security field. That narrative says that, for instance, access to the natural resources or changes in the access to the natural resources may affect conflicts. In any case, debates on those topics are open. We don't know what we don't know. We know that we don't know. But what we know is that climate action cannot succeed without peace. That's something that we all agree. And also that peace won't be achieved if we don't have climate action. So we need to ensure climate action for achieving peace. So that's something that almost no one not accept. So what the literature says about this? Because these discussions come from back in, I don't know, 2000, I don't know, many years back. So one is the scarcity or unequal sharing. What is this? I think that maybe I can, just in case you are not seeing this. So what this says? This is more super aligned with the narrative of the adaptation side. scarcity of water, scarcity of food will cause conflict. The second one, accessibility or competition, is super aligned with the narrative of the mitigation side. What does it mean? Changes in the governance of the access of natural resources will affect conflict. So this is quite simple. And the third one is super aligned with the narrative of the forest people, forest conservation perspective. What says that opportunities for illegal arms to operate cause conflict. For one example of this is that in some areas, armed groups hide, therefore they conserve those areas. Once the conflict is over, there is no reason for conserving those areas and deforestation start to appear. Those from Colombia would say that this is the narrative that predominates the context after the peace agreement. And I will explain more in detail about this during this presentation. And then I will explain you how, by understanding these relationships, we propose and implement actions on the ground for addressing the things. So, after the peace agreement signed between the government of Colombia and the FARC, there was some fear from some authors, and from some stakeholders that the peace agreement that peace agreement would influence an increase in deforestation. So we responded to that question in a paper recently published, and we identified that that was the case. For instance, we can see that in all these trends of these are trends of deforestation. In all the trends of deforestation, in almost all the trends of deforestation, we find that by the year of the peace agreement, deforestation increases. So this confirms that the peace agreement had an effect on deforestation. But that there is a correlation, it doesn't mean causality. And that's something important to understand. So we go deep to understand what were the drivers of these changes. And what we identified is that coca leaf production, cattle ranching, and municipality area were the main drivers of deforestation. And what happened after the peace agreement was that all these three variables are connected with land grabbing. So there is a cycle. People start doing coca, then they move, they get some land, then they grab the land, they start over again. So when we see this, what happened was not necessarily the peace agreement, but the changes in the governance. And these different trends in deforestation were more explained by the use of forest by the armed groups, and not necessarily because of the peace agreement. So based on this, we provide some insights for designing policies and actions on the ground. So, and we identified a vicious cycle between all the three elements that I mentioned it before. So it's not only food security, but it's also part of the equation. It is not only governance, but it's also part of the equation. It's all the three components of the hypothesis of the on the relationship between natural resources and conflict that creates this vicious cycle on deforestation, on conflict, on climate change adaptation, mitigation. So, for instance, actions to achieve peace can exacerbate the drivers of land use change. We identified that happened, and we also identified that climate action can be a driver of conflict by restricting the access to the land and the access to the water and access to food. So that we identified this in our studies, and we also identified that some entry points for changing these vicious cycles and become them virtuous cycles. How much time I have? 2 minutes. Okay. So at the end, we implemented a project. The project is called SLUS Project, Sustainable Land Use Systems Project. It prioritized intervention in conflict-affected areas. that are also affected by deforestation because of climate change mitigation. We are interested in climate change mitigation. By SLUs, by doing SLUs, which means sustainable land use systems, we are also implementing food systems perspective. Why we are implementing food systems perspective? Because we try to connect a bunch of policy instruments that are more land-based and a bunch of policy instruments that are more economical, financial-based. And the only way we find to connect them was by implementing food systems perspective. For instance, an example of this, Red Plus is in that side, and also zero deforestation supply approaches are on this side, but natural protected areas are on this side, or sustainable practices are on this side. So we need to connect them because we need to produce well, but as well we need to commercialize and incentivize people to, and farmers to do it in a proper way. Our approach included participatory perspective, so we created some dialogue spaces, and we developed science to inform the dialogues, this dialogue. Our objectives were to help or contribute to the integration of policies, specifically mitigation and peace building, develop a bunch of systems, sustainable production systems that are also connected to markets, so we implemented value chain strategies, and business models that can help us to overcome barriers to the adoption of these practices. I will leave it here, and I will give you a piece of paper indicating these 5 great achievements. But I will highlight that for me, the main achievement of this project is that we have 8 PhD students and 5 master students, most of them from Colombia, most of them women, and most of these people will for sure contribute to continue doing science and working on this topic. In addition to that, we created many tools for integrating peace building and climate change. We reach more than 2,000 producers and other type of stakeholders. We also have an impact in other initiatives, not only at local scale, but also at global scale. For instance, there is an initiative called Cocoa Forest and Peace Initiative that was highly influenced by research performed in this project. And 60 conflict-affected farms were also intervened. So I will leave it here so Elisa can continue with her presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Augusto. I think I'll use this mic as well. Yeah, let me. No. Right. So yeah, thank you to Augusto for that. So I'm gonna show you. So my presentation will talk about, like I said earlier, a concept on a nature-based solution that could deliver multiple sustainable development gains, including climate mitigation and peace building. So I'm going to show you a slide right now. Is this one? All right. Who here know? I'm pretty sure some of you know this guy. So who is this guy? Rambo. So Rambo is a movie character depicted by Sylvester Stallone. And how I would describe him is that he's tough, he's resilient, and he's a survivor. So we have at CGIAR named a root crop as Rambo root. Anyone here knows about Rambo root? Augusto, don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. Anyone knows what this is? No? I'm going to show you what is Rambo root. How do I next one? So anyone could, so this is cassava, yuca, manhilot, or manioc, wherever you might be. In my country, we call it kamoteng kahoy, which is wood. Kahoy is wood, and kamote is sweet potato. So just like Rambo, Rambo root is resilient, it's a survivor, because back in 2012, scientists from CGIAR found that cassava could actually withstand an increase of temperature of 2 degrees centigrade in Africa by 2030. Which means that because in Africa, they eat cassava, somehow they could promote food security. But then, at some point, a few years ago, some of our scientists, including Augusto and two others, had this, at CIAT, when you go there, there's a kiosk where you can have coffee or dessert. And after lunch, you would find some of these scientists huddle, exchange ideas. And among the ideas that came about, we turned that into a paper, which you will see here. Oh, sorry. So this is the paper that we published presenting our concept for this nature-based solution. And that is Rambu root cassava to the rescue, how a simple low-cost solution can lead to multiple sustainable development gains. Later on, I will show you, outline you the different sustainable development goals that cultivating cassava could actually contribute to. So the idea here, I'm going to show you, is this. The concept is this. So basically, we see cassava, which is very easy to propagate because what you need is, of course, land. You need weeding, you need fertilizer, and a stock from the previous season. And what's good about cassava is you could plant it on poor soil, which would characterize pretty much degraded land. An example of degraded land would be a forest that has been cut for agricultural purposes and then abandoned. So the idea is when you plant cassava, it's a root crop, it will break the land and prevent from compaction. Because compacted land is not very easy to revive. But so long it's not compacted, you can revive the soil. And once you do that, theoretically you can plant catch crops, which are nitrogen-fixing legumes. And therefore they could act as a carbon sequestration mechanism. But at the same time, when the mulch of these catch crops, you can use them as a way to enrich the soil and restore soil health. And at some point, if you keep doing this, you will have land that's good enough to be planted with other crops, such as cocoa, under an agroforestry system. And in the case of Colombia, it is an agroforestry system, right? And an agroforestry system, you have different types of crops. And when I went there actually in September, I went to agroforest, cocoa agroforest, and they have chicken, it depends on how big the land would be, but sometimes there are 40 hectares, they also have cattle. So this is a self-sustaining system. And so at some point you'll have cocoa and maybe livestock and chicken. And of course, what this means is that the farmers would have different sources of income and different sources of food. So the last slide that I will present to you will be just to outline the different sustainable development goals that cultivating cassava on degraded land could contribute to. Of course, I was with no poverty, improved livelihoods, with the fact that they are earning from not only cassava, because there's a high demand of cassava in Colombia, for instance, then they could sell cassava as a form of food, because in Colombia we have, what I love is the pan de bono. Pan de bono, right? So, and then of course with cocoa, Colombia is a country that, unlike other cocoa producing countries, consume most of cocoa, like 80 to 90%. So they have a very strong market for cocoa. They've been drinking chocolate de mesa for millennia. So that would be, it would contribute to that. Second is zero hunger, because through the concept, you're going to establish agroforestry where you can find different sources of food. In the case of Colombia, it would be, of course, they love cassava, plantain, which they put in one of their, I guess, national dishes called sancocho, right? And of course, with production of cassava, the idea is to reduce the pressure on forests from crops that have been used to produce starch. That would include maize and soybean. And then with climate action, of course, with the catch crops and agroforestry, there are carbon sinks, which are ways to actually offset the emissions that we just couldn't eliminate. So long as we eat, no matter what kind of diet we are, there will be emissions, and we need to generate or create these carbon sinks. And life on land is the restoration of degraded land. And of course, depending on the area, it could contribute to peace. Because in the case of Colombia, many of the lands that suffer from degradation, and according to the government, around 40% of land in Colombia suffers from some form of degradation. And usually these are in areas that are affected by conflict and in areas where the government and their development partners actually promote cocoa cultivation as a way to eliminate coca. And as you've heard from Augusto, that there is a connection between coca, deforestation, and conflict. So that's the whole idea of this nature-based solution. We actually presented that again in the paper, and we actually presented this to a donor and sought funding for it. So hopefully that will become a reality at some point in the future. So that's my presentation. And we will go now to the moderated panel. But before that, let me go to a slide that actually will also show the one-pager that we presented. Okay. So this is the one that you will see on the piece of paper. I'm just gonna repeat because the third slide will be we will touch on that. So again, we have 23 papers published in peer-reviewed journals with good impact factors. What that means is that these journals are cited in many papers. We have 4 tools on showing the integration of peace-building co-benefits into climate action, zero deforestation dialogues that we've enhanced, the 2,000 producers and other actors in the cocoa and dairy value chains that we've reached, and the 13 postgraduate students. I'm one of those, just to say. So let me just focus on this because we will touch on this in our moderated panel. So for this moderated panel, as I've said, we are very grateful for having these 2 people join us. I know it's been very hectic for all of us, so we'd like to thank them for being with us today. So thank you, Augusto, for arranging the chair. So for this session, I would like to invite, where's that? Sorry about that. I'd like to invite to our panel someone from the German Ministry of Environment. Her name is Dr. Toa Lange. She is an ecologist and working at the Division on International Cooperation and Biodiversity at the German Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection, or BMUV. She has more than a decade of experience working on climate change, REDD+, biodiversity, and payment for ecosystem services, particularly in Latin American countries. She's now very much involved in the 4th pillar of the International Climate Initiative of Germany on biodiversity conservation and sustainable land use. So our next speaker for this panel is Maria Alejandra Garzon Sanchez. She is a forestry mitigation expert at the Directorate of Climate Change and Risk Management of Colombia's Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. She's an environmental engineer with experience on local development, as well as in developing monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, carbon markets, and the implementation of REDD+ mechanism, particularly with indigenous, Afro-Colombian, and peasant communities. Alejandra will be responding to my questions in Spanish, and Augusto will help with the translation of her response. So, Augusto, please join us. So, my first question is this. So, we've been talking about food systems. How do we define food system? All right, I will define it. So, food system can be described as the actors and activities involved in the production, processing, consumption, and disposition of food, and the environments, whether that be social, economic, political, and biophysical environment surrounding these actors and activities. So a food system perspective, which Augusto mentioned earlier, would consider all these different aspects. So my question for Toa and Alejandra is, what are the ways that your ministries have considered such perspective in their work? So, Towa.
Thank you for the question. I guess it's hard not to speak, but you hear me, right? Okay, so that's a hard question, but I think in these last days we have been talking a lot about the interlinkages between climate, biodiversity, but also pollution. So I think one of the things we're doing by supporting this type of projects is trying to come up with nice idea, research, scientific-based information on how can we deal with these very complicated topics. And you were talking about nature-based solutions. And for example, yesterday the presidency of Egypt with IUCN and Germany as a co-chair, we launched the initiative on nature-based solutions. And the idea is to create somehow a platform where all this knowledge and all these initiatives that are being created on the ground can be upscaled, but also we have somehow to share experiences and to try to also find ways to finance better ways to keep implementing these initiatives. In Germany, we also work a lot with the Bond Challenge. That was a very successful program from Germany trying to conserve forests, reforestation, REDD+, especially in Latin America. And from that, we also gave some support for the UN Restoration and Ecosystem Decade, which also was kind of successful. So I think we have been building up and all this knowledge. And I think I heard today that REDD+ is also on the cover decision. We'll see if it stays there. Because I think a lot of things that they were like lessons learned from REDD+ are somehow forgotten on these negotiations. So we come up every time with a new topic, and then we start like forgetting about what has been negotiated in the last years. So I guess it'll be great to keep learning on what we're doing, and I guess and I hope that from the German government this type of initiatives can give countries like Colombia chances to find ways how to keep growing, because you have been doing a great job, and we hope that we can keep working together. So now I give it to you because I cannot talk too much about peace building.
Bueno, buen día para todos. Los sistemas alimentarios. Entonces, los sistemas alimentarios son relevantes dentro de la política pública nacional desde la perspectiva de la soberanía alimentaria. En ese sentido, digamos que las condiciones en las que se dan, particularmente este año, en la que juntamos la crisis de fertilizantes, en la que cruzamos un fenómeno de la niña muy intenso, en la que juntamos también una serie de situaciones específicas de nuestro territorio, evidenciamos esa necesidad de poder hacer acciones concretas desde el gobierno nacional relacionados con garantizar la soberanía alimentaria.
Good morning to everyone. Food systems are considered in the Colombian government mainly as a food sovereignty issue, particularly considering this crisis that we are experiencing right now related to fertilizers crisis and food crisis. Therefore, this concept of food sovereignty takes more importance for the government.
En ese sentido, tanto las acciones para controlar la deforestación como las acciones para lograr llevar un proceso, una transición de desarrollo bajo en carbono en el sector agropecuario son claves y se están incluyendo dentro de los programas regionales que se están adelantando, como en los marcos de política pública a nivel nacional.
In that sense, efforts for reducing deforestation as well as for achieving food sovereignty and sustainable food systems are being considered at a regional scale in the plans that regional governments are implementing for addressing climate change issues.
Para finalizar, el vínculo entre estas actividades que se están llevando a cabo junto con ese propósito de alcanzar y de consolidar la paz, ¿sí?, en el territorio nacional, necesitan ser pensados integralmente, justamente porque, como mencionaba Augusto hace un rato, no se logrará la acción climática efectiva y una justicia climática también en el territorio si no está trabajada de la mano con el proceso de consolidación de la paz. Entonces, junto con la reactivación del proceso de paz y la reforma agraria que se está proponiendo desde el gobierno, son las dos grandes apuestas en este sentido.
Two big investments for the future from the Colombian government are one, the agrarian reform, and the other, and the reactivation of the peace agreement. In that context, actions like action for improving productivity without hurting the forest and without increasing emissions and without increasing deforestation are welcome.
Thank you, Toa and Alejandro. Also, Augusto, for the great translation. So the next question is about, as we know, there's this big zero deforestation movement, right? And it has grown immensely over the years. And if we think about it, this is a form of supply chain approach toward responsible production and consumption. So for both Germany and Colombia, how important it is to is the zero deforestation approach in promoting low emission development?
And from the European Union, we have been working on a law, zero deforestation law, especially focusing on commodities, trying to reduce also deforestation and the woods we're consuming in Europe, that they should come from free deforestation. And we are focusing on 7 main commodities. I think it's wood, coffee, cocoa, soy, palm oil, cattle, and something I'm missing. But the idea is that we're trying and testing how this can work, really to ensure that the products that have this zero deforestation label are really coming from zero deforestation. And this is something very difficult. So we have been starting with some pilots, and I'm not the person on that, so please don't ask too much on this. But the idea is that when we start, or the European Union start with this concept, also talking to the private sector, it was very complicated. And this is something we also have to take into account, because it's the producer, but also until the consumer, you have to tackle the whole value chain and try to find ways to ensure that every process is really zero deforestation. So after talking to the private sector, we said we cannot have a law for all the goods that we are importing to the European Union, but rather we have to try with the most dangerous commodities that are causing a lot of deforestation. And I guess this is one important step. And I think things are trying to change, but of course nothing is enough, and we have to tackle it from various perspectives. And also, like in the case of Colombia, that the local markets are also important. So we need to have a global approach on how to keep working on this.
Bien, para Colombia, los temas de desarrollo bajo en carbono para el sector agropecuario son importantes y están incluidos desde su NDC.
Thank you. For Colombia, low emissions agricultural production is extremely important and are included in the agenda since the NDC.
Principalmente porque dentro del inventario de gases de efecto invernadero, los cambios de uso del suelo y justamente esas actividades asociadas a la deforestación y a las actividades productivas agropecuarias son los que mayor aporte generan en el inventario nacional.
Mainly because land use change of forestry sector is the sector that contributes the more with emissions in Colombia.
En ese sentido, diferentes iniciativas que se están adelantando en este momento, como el proyecto IKI, como el proyecto Biocarbono Orinoquía, le proveen al país no solo actividades que se llevan propiamente al territorio relacionadas con cómo hacer esa transición en las cadenas productivas.
In that sense, projects like this IKI, as well as other IKI projects, and a project from the Biocarbon Fund from the World Bank, provides concrete examples of how to translate this policy narrative, policy legislation in concrete actions on the ground.
Se perdió. Y también una serie de iniciativas asociadas a los acuerdos cero deforestación en diferentes cadenas como leche, como la carne u otras cadenas productivas que se están trabajando en este momento.
Also, dialogues that are happening under agreement zero deforestation in specific supply chains, livestock, meat, milk, cocoa, palm, and coffee, I think. A parenthesis, we are leading, supported by this project, the dialogue on dairy, on the dairy sector, zero deforestation.
En ese sentido, los aportes principales son consolidar información que se puede extrapolar a todo el país del sector agropecuario, pero también consolidar esos arreglos en territorio para que tanto los productores pequeños, los grandes productores, las instituciones y todos los eslabones de la cadena se incorporen dentro del proceso de desarrollo bajo en carbono.
This is important because helps to make all the stakeholders of the supply chain gather together to contribute towards the low emissions development in the agricultural sector.
Okay, so we're down to the last question for this panel. So as we all know, traceability is an important part of zero deforestation. Because conflict-affected settings are kind of complicated, so I'd just like to ask our guests, how can traceability be implemented in settings like this?
I don't think I can answer that question. That should be something the project, for example, should answer, or the 9 PhDs we are supporting, because that's a really hard question. So I hope we can have some nice papers and we can learn a lot about that. But let me give it a try. So at the European Union, we have been also working on something that is like electronic product pass. And this is not really, or at least not really for products like coffee or cocoa, but we'll try to expand it. And the idea is to have some electronic method to really track where does the product come from, so the origin, the transportation, because a lot of the emissions are really during the transportation period and not the origin or the consumer. And at the end, especially for electronic products, the life and if it could be recycled, or how can you reuse the product that before giving it to the trash. And we have been doing some research on that and testing it, this product pass, and the idea is to keep developing it. And also the Ministry of Environment of Germany changed the name, and we used to be the BMU, and now we're the UNUB. And this is because the consumer protection is part of the Ministry of Environment now. And the idea is to bring these topics of consumers that are very related to the environment as well. So because consumers need to have healthy products, access to information, and also try to avoid the idea that you can replace things and that all the things we buy are always replaceable and that you can keep buying and buying. So I think we're like trying to get there, but of course it's very complicated, and we need also to work very close from countries like Colombia who are producers and exporters, because we need to get along. We are the markets, we are the consumers of many of the products, and you are the exporters. So I see here a very good connection, and we've been working together, and I guess we should keep doing that in order to find ways. And with this information, PhD students will get for us in the next year. So I'm very excited to get to know how can we do it. But now I'll give it to you because I don't have any answer.
Bien, creo que la trazabilidad podemos verla desde dos perspectivas.
I believe traceability can be seen from two perspectives.
La primera asociada justamente a la confianza de los diferentes actores de la cadena, desde esa mirada del sector agropecuario.
The first one based on the draft of the different stakeholders of the supply chain.
Que actualmente se está trabajando con el Ministerio de Agricultura.
Which actually is being worked with the Ministry of Agriculture.
Asociado también en ese vínculo con la política de control de deforestación y gestión de los bosques.
And this under the umbrella of the policy for control of the deforestation.
Buscando justamente que se pueda tener la información consolidada sobre cuál es ese proceso que está desarrollando y el valor agregado que se le está dando a los productos que se están generando, con el fin que pueda tenerse una mayor rentabilidad justamente de esos productos que se generan con las comunidades.
The main objective is to gather data that can help us to understand the process for achieving this traceability on the first, and on the second, to understand the added value of doing this and how this would not affect farmers or increase costs.
Y que efectivamente represente una alternativa rentable para las comunidades en esa transición de las prácticas asociadas a la deforestación.
And importantly, that do not represent an extra cost for communities involved in the process.
Y la segunda perspectiva está más asociada a la trazabilidad vista desde el monitoreo, el reporte y la verificación de esas acciones que se están desarrollando.
The second point of view is related to the MRV, monitoring, reporting and verification of the actions that are being implemented on the ground.
Que justamente buscará llevar esa información que se genera a nivel de finca, a nivel de pequeño propietario o de asociación productiva, para convertirse en información que sirva para la toma de decisiones climáticas, para la toma de decisiones frente a la contabilidad nacional.
Which aims at gathering all this information to inform this policy decision making regarding control of the deforestation.
¿Listo?
That's all.
Okay, thank you so much, Toa, Alejandra, and I guess Augusto for the translation. So we're opening now the floor for questions. If you have questions, please state your name, your organization, and who you would like to address your question to. Anyone from our audience? Okay, Charles. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for a wonderful presentation of the work. I mean, the results speak for themselves, so it's really fantastic what you're doing. I suppose this isn't a question specifically for one of you. Whoever most feels suited to it can respond, but it seems wonderful that these producers are being recognized for zero deforestation and that there might be more of a market for zero deforestation products. But the Rambo roots example and some of the other examples we've seen here seem to me like there's even almost a form of active restoration going on by restoring these soils, by creating agroforestry systems where there was a cattle pasture before. So to that extent, can you see restoration and reforestation being incorporated into these models so that the farmers are being rewarded not only for avoiding deforestation, but for actively restoring ecosystems?
We have a student, Janelle, you know her, is working on restoration. So if she would be here, then probably she would respond this better than me. Not all farmers are doing restoration. That's one thing. For instance, we, as part of the project, identifying that although the narrative is that cocoa in Colombia is produced in agroforestry systems and therefore is not driving deforestation nor not degradation, we identified at least 13%. We surveyed a significant sample of cocoa producers in Caquetá and Cesar, and we identified that at least 13% of those farmers are doing encroachment, meaning they are felling down some trees and hiding below the cocoa. If that is the case and we can prove this and more results support this idea, then cocoa may be causing degradation instead of not causing or contributing to restoration. That's one thing. On the livestock sector, the results show that silvopastoral production systems are highly good, not only for the environment, but as well for the quality of the product, meaning the milk, meaning the meat. It's fantastic. However, most of our results are based on pilots in farms. Based on that, when I say we, it's not only the project, but all stakeholders are developing strategies for scaling these silvopastoral systems. However, as our results are from pilots, we don't know what will happen when we scale out the system. We are expecting all things positive. However, we don't know if there is going to be unexpected, non-desirable effects. And what we've published in a recent paper is, for instance, that when we implement silvopastoral systems or any kind of sustainable livestock systems, what we do is to improve all the outputs of production. And one of the outputs of production in the cattle ranching sector is the production of calves. So if we increase all the outputs of production, we are also increasing the production of calves. And strategies are targeting specifically or mainly cattle ranches working on the dairy sector. The dairy sector is for sure not driving deforestation, but the calves from the dairy sector in a system called double purpose are sold to the production of meat. And the meat is produced in the area where deforestation is happening. And this is the way we are not doing traceability, but we are trying to understand these non-expected positive and negative effects of scaling out sustainable production systems. Hope this somehow responds to your question.
Okay, Katie.
Sorry, this is so loud, so I hope you can hear me. In terms of conflict-affected areas, has there been any discussion around like labeling or tracking and tracing of food that is grown in areas that's not conflict affected, so that consumers aren't contributing to this link between conflict and degradation of land? In terms of, I don't actually know that much about what happens to the land when it's taken over by particular groups who are engaged in conflict, if they're actually producing on it, and then if they're selling that food in order to continue this purchasing arms and continue the cycle of conflict. So I'd be really interested to know if there's any discussion around actually like consumers being able to make choices so that they're not continuing to invest in the conflict.
En este momento, estudios específicos sobre ese relacionamiento no conozco que se estén desarrollando. Ciertamente sí, digamos que es necesario que, como mencionábamos ahorita, esas acciones que se implementen en los territorios justamente compensen los costos asociados a las actividades ilícitas que son motores de deforestación.
At this moment, Alejandra is not aware of any study pursuing this kind of responses, of this kind of objectives. But what everyone is doing, or most interventions are doing, is that they are at least ensuring that the cost of implementing sustainable alternatives are kind of overwhelmed by the benefits. I mean, benefit more than cost, and that's what is happening. In the context of the project of this CPK project during this year until October, what we are doing is developing business models, and we are expecting to reach markets, or at least to develop a product that can take the value of peace and take value of the non-deforestation. At this moment, what we know is there is no market that value this. Neither deforestation nor peace. We can say, but there is no extra. When I say value, is that they pay extra for these kind of things. This is what we know at this moment, at least for the cocoa sector. And in Colombia, is specifically super important because both the livestock, the outputs of livestock and the outputs of cocoa are mainly traded locally in non-certified markets. Therefore, it makes even more difficult to try to reach a premium on this. So what Alejandra says is extremely important, that we need to ensure that at least the benefits overcome the cost of doing this stuff to not affect communities.
Any other question from? All right. Given that, I would like to take Alejandra and Toa and Augusto for your concluding remarks so we can close the session. Yeah. Thank you. So,
I actually don't have concluding remarks. I think that I've been talking a lot. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time. For us, it's an honor to present our results. We are kind of in the final year of the project, and this year we will have several events in several spaces for presenting the outputs of the project. And hopefully we will come to this kind of meeting with the 13 students, so they can present their work and not our presenting their work, because we are not being fair with them and the quality of their research. So thank you so much again for your time. See you soon. I don't know where, but see you soon.
thank you, everyone.